This episode is brought to you by the Sasquatch Flag Company. The Sasquatch Flag Company is a family-owned business in New England that builds hand-carved American flags from seasoned white pine. Each flag is hand-built and each star on the flag is hand-hammered and chiseled. No two flags are alike. They offer a variety of flag designs to honor the police, military, firefighters, dispatchers, and search and rescue personnel, to name a few. These stunning handmade flags look great in an office, a studio, the back porch, or above the fireplace mantle. They make the perfect gift for the veteran, first responder, or patriot in your life. Now, I love these flags, and I've been giving them as gifts for years, and I was a customer long before they became a sponsor of the show. I can't recommend them enough. So if you're looking for that perfect, uniquely American-made gift to give away, or if you want to treat yourself, go to SasquatchFlags.com and get your order in today. This episode is brought to you by the Fraternity of Excellence. The Fraternity of Excellence is an online and real-world community for men who are looking to improve in all areas of their lives. The men of FOE are working together to become better husbands, fathers, and leaders at work and in their communities. They live by a simple philosophy: as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Now, I've been a member for more than 3 years, and for me, I finally found a brotherhood of men that I was missing from my time in the military. Now, I love being around guys who are dedicated to becoming a better version of themselves. So if you're interested in becoming a man of excellence as well, go to fraternityofexcellence.com, or you can reach out directly to me to learn more. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Retired Commodore Peter Scott from the Royal Australian Navy. Peter served on 10 submarines and 20 different command and leadership appointments over 34 years in the service. He is a veteran of multiple special operations with the submarine arm. He also saw service in Iraq, the Persian Gulf, and Afghanistan during 2006 and 2007. He is the author of a brand new book called Running Deep, an Australian Submarine Life, and I am honored to have him on the show to learn from his leadership experiences in the Royal Australian Navy submarine service. So, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
It's an honor to meet you, sir, and thank you for your long service and really remarkable career that you had with the submarine force. And I'm interested in learning some leadership lessons from those long years that you served. But I wanted to start off and just ask you, why the submarine service? Why did you choose submarine duty? What was your why that you went towards that very unusual combat platform, I should say?
Yeah, great. So I joined the Navy for certain reasons. I'd probably been in the Navy for half a dozen years before I made that call to volunteer for submarines, and it is a volunteer service. And by that time, I'd seen a bit of the Navy. I'd served in a destroyer, in a patrol boat or two, in the flagship and in our training ship. Importantly, I'd also met my wife-to-be. And it started to dawn on me that the Navy was not only going to demand quite a bit of me, it was also going to demand quite a bit of, those around me, the people that I cared for. And that got me thinking about, if I'm going to be making sacrifice, for me and mine, then I want to make that as worthwhile as possible. And, I joined the Navy in the early 80s. So this is sort of mid 80s. And I joined the Navy just after the Falklands War. So I had images of the USS, pardon me, not the USS, the HMS Conqueror, sinking the Argentinian flagship, the Belgrano. And there was just nothing like that for a vision of, decisive naval power. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to offer the most meaningful and effective service I can, we've got submarines. They are absolutely the most potent element of our Navy. That's where I'll go. So that was the driver.
Yeah. It's similar to me as well. I was very much fascinated with underwater warfare, and hearing the stories of World War II commanders and the things that they did. And I was just fascinated as a young boy, reading those stories and hearing those stories, and just
Right.
knowing how lethal they were as a force. And it was like, sign me up. Where do I go? Where do I
Yeah.
go to
Yeah.
join?
And certainly, close to our home, that US Pacific submarine fleet that
Yeah.
was so effective through the Second World War. And a lot of those US boats were operating out of Australia during
Yes.
those war years, both east and west coast, and heading up into Southeast Asia and doing great work. So I was aware of that sort of history as well.
Yeah.
Became more familiar with that once I joined submarines and started to really get stuck into understanding that.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. When I talk about my experiences on submarines, I always have to explain how it's such a different asset. It's such a different military unit than other military units. Explain, just in your own words, what makes the submarine service so unique when as compared to other military units.
Yeah, right. So unique's, I don't know if unique is quite the right word, because as I think on the challenges that we face on board a submarine, many of the challenges are the same as those that you might face on a surface destroyer. It's things like just the demands of being at sea and contesting with the sea, isolation, time away from home, the need to operate independently. The challenge of operating these highly technical platforms and getting the most out of them. So you face those challenges pretty much anywhere at sea in the Navy. I think the difference is a matter of degree with submarines. So, if a warship is complex, a submarine is more complex. If the challenges of being at sea are, can be difficult, well, put your craft under the water and they become more difficult. You know, nuclear submarines, and we're heading that way, will spend more time and be more isolated perhaps than diesel boats, but we would spend weeks and months away from home. So often the isolation from home, and even the isolation from the support of other units, because we operate so independently, can be quite extreme. So I'd say it's that matter of degree. The challenges tend to be similar, but there's just that extra little edge on everything when you're at sea in a submarine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess there is a really fundamental difference, though, in the way that a submarine goes about its business compared to the average warship. And, the average warship is, their posture tends to be quite overt. They puff up.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, I'm a warship. Look at me and look out. And a submarine goes about its business in a very different way, because, stealth is the fundamental tenet that allows us to go away and do the things that we do, and preservation of stealth shapes how we operate. So, we won't be there transmitting on radars and transmitting on sonars. We'll always have this, or typically have this very passive operating posture where we're trying to see what's going on without being seen, and hear what's going on without being heard, and so on. So that does change the nature of the operations, and that changes the nature of the command environment on board and the way we work. Yeah, that's quite a significant difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know, at least with our boats, I was on a missile boat and we operated independently. So we would go out without any other assets. We were alone.
Yep.
We had a patrol box, and that's where we went.
Alone and unafraid, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we used to call it hide with pride. That was our job. So,
Yep.
yeah. But so now you have a new book out, and I want to talk about that. The book is called Running Deep, an Australian Submarine Life. What inspired you to tell your story, and who's the book written for?
Right. So It's a curious thing. It is not within my nature or character to be out and telling stories about myself, certainly. But over time, I realised that life in a submarine is a very natural and normal thing for me and for all my shipmates. But for most Australians, it's quite an exotic and a largely unknowable way of life. So submarines, it's hard to imagine what it's like, and it's really easy to misunderstand what it's like and what it's about. So I wanted to write something that would offer people insight into, a genuinely rare existence and help them see what it's like to live that life, what it takes, and in particular, what it takes to do it well. Because as you would know, John, you do not want to do it badly.
Yeah.
And also what it means to the people who, go to sea and serve in submarines, why they do it, what they take away from it. So it's written for anyone who might be interested in understanding more about that. I think it's the sort of book that would appeal to people who are, drawn to challenge and adventure. I like to think that it might inspire some further generations of Australian submariners. But I also, and you've had a quick look at it, there's stuff in there that will just scare most people away, to be perfectly frank. Most people will read that and say, good on you, Scotty, all yours, don't send me anywhere near a submarine ever. But, for me, the book does talk to, some of the challenges and some of the difficult days, but it also talks to the enduring satisfaction that people get from living and working with submarines and submariners. So that's what it's about.
That's great. I mean, just being able to give that, that's the one thing the feedback I get from my books is like, my second book especially is full of sea stories, and the feedback I get is, wow, I just had no idea that it was like that, no idea that, you did those kind of things. And it was just kind of and it was just like you said, giving them exposure to what this kind of quiet life and not many people do. And just get that sort of inside view of what life is like on a submarine, and the lessons you learn along the way, dealing with people. You're locked in a metal tube with, the size of your crew. We had 155 on an Ohio class, but you're locked in a metal tube. And for us, it was 3 months at a time, and you had to figure things out.
Yeah, it's not a regular existence by any means. And I think also, John, I felt a sense of responsibility. It is like I feel privileged to have led that life. The capabilities are so important and increasingly important, I think, certainly in Australia, for our national security and defence. The Australian taxpayer puts a lot of coin into our submarine capability and our defence. So when you do understand what it's about, I think you have a responsibility to help people see that, knowing in particular that, we set sail, you're out of Sydney Harbour or whichever port, and you're gone, you're out of sight, you're out of mind. So there's also that responsibility to help people understand what the capability is about and what the capability does for the nation.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does. Now, you describe submarine command as, and I love this, is leadership with ultimate authority and accountability. Explain what that's like. I mean, because I served on submarines, but I never was the commanding officer. I never was that, had that singular role as I had two commanding officers, and I learned so much from them. But that is a special job, commanding a submarine. So explain a little bit about that, of what you mean by ultimate authority and accountability.
Yeah, sure. So look, John, everybody has a boss. We've all got a commander out there, but we've just spoken a little bit about the independence of submarine operations. So when a submarine is out there at sea, to all intents and purposes, the captain is the Navy. For those officers and sailors on board, effectively there is no higher authority than the captain. Now that's not technically true, but it's kind of it's a reality that people live with. So I use that sort of phrase, ultimate responsibility and authority, really for a couple of reasons. One is to form a mindset within the captain, which is, you're the boss. Don't leave any of your power, authority, experience on the ground. Explore and utilize it fully. When you're the captain, you have the right to do anything. So use your judgment and make the calls and set the direction. Now, there's another side to that, of course, and that's the responsibility side. And it also means you have to absolutely honor your responsibilities. And every decision that you make, every command that you give, will have an impact somewhere down the line, for better or for worse. So you've got to honor that responsibility, and you will be held to account. The performance of your submarine, the welfare of your people, the futures of your people, you will be held to account for those decisions. So it's kind of two parts. Get out there and be the complete commanding officer that you can, but also honor your responsibilities and your accountabilities just as completely. Yeah.
Well, one of the things as you're talking, and I'm thinking to myself, as an officer on a submarine, I had responsibilities, and I always say it was a 24/7 business, right? So you were always on stage all the time. But I was a junior officer. I had fellow JOs. I could shut the door and have a conversation. What's it like as the commanding officer, where you don't have an equal on board? You have maybe an executive officer that you could shut the door and have conversations, but how do you recharge, reset, refresh to be ready for the next day if you've had a bad day, when you're sort of sole responsibility without an equal on board?
Yeah, it can be difficult, and it can not only feel isolated, it can be quite isolating. I think, you mentioned people like your XO. We have a chief of the boat as well, who's the senior enlisted.
We do too. Mm-hmm.
And you have relationships with everybody on board, and you can rightfully lean on some of those relationships for different things. You can rightfully have a conversation with your XO about command aspects. You can rightfully have a conversation with your chief of the boat about how the troops are going and so on. And you need to have the right relationship with those people to be able to draw on them. You also need to have the right relationship with yourself to be able to stand in your own judgment, stand with your own convictions and so on. I think one of the great blessings of the way we bring our people up in our submarine arm is we're always training and preparing for the next responsibility. And we go through a very comprehensive command qualifying course to prepare us for command. One of the curious aspects about that course is that there is very little feedback. You're scrutinized very closely for months on end, both ashore and at sea, but you get very little direct feedback. And that's kind of because you've got to be making your own decisions about your judgment and how you're going, and whether you're getting too tired, or whether whether you're driving your people too hard. There's, I'll often say, the submarines are highly technical, and there's all sorts of, technical support out there for you, but there's still no barometer that will tell you how I'm going in command today. You've got to decide and judge that for yourself.
Mm.
So it's accept your responsibilities, accept your position on board, draw the support and the connection that you can and that you need to, but don't overburden your people with your command responsibilities, and be willing to stand in your own judgment and, sleep and rest easy at night, knowing that you're doing the best that you can, and the best that you can is probably good enough.
Wow. It's like I said, I found it to be difficult just, those 3 months, as always being on stage, but at least I had, peers. And so I think about that often as like being without peers, but it makes a lot of sense what you say, in terms of, how to find those resources to get that support, but also being very strong in your own, self-value and self-worth, and having thought through some of these things. So, and like
Yeah.
you said, I think the one thing about the submarine force that I liked is the fact that you don't get the further more and more responsibility until you've done the lower tasks first. So you earn your
Right.
way to those spots.
Yeah.
So you're given a lot of experiences along the way. So the point where you get to commanding officer, you've seen a lot of things, versus maybe in a civilian job, you might become CEO and you've never run a business before, which can happen.
Right.
So at
Right.
least
Yeah.
there's progressive responsibilities in the submarine force.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you see is, certainly I did, was you see a lot of commanding officers, and you work out pretty quickly what it is that you appreciate from this guy and what you do not appreciate from this guy. And that can dramatically shape who you aspire to be as a commanding officer. What you observe in others. I think another part to it, John, is understanding that yes, you're a pivotal cog in that wheel, but you have an entire ship's company there who are there to help you achieve the submarine's aims. So I used to remind myself, we have a crew of about 65 on board a Collins class submarine, and doing the math, I realized one day that at best I hold 1 to 2% of the total cognitive and emotional and physical capacity of that ship's company. And my job, as I saw it, was to activate the other 98, 99% of capacity on board. So if that's all I had to do was help them get out and do their best, that sort of puts a very different lens on who you are and who you need to be as the captain.
I like that a lot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I often say this, and I've said this in my books, that a crew brings a ship to life. You say something similar. You say that submarines are crewed by people, and you mentioned the size of the crew on board. When you think of it that way, because we talked about submarines being a highly technical piece of equipment, right?
Yeah.
But it's crewed by people, and so when you think of it that way, which is I've got the technical side on it, I've got the people side on it. How does that?
Yeah.
Why is that significant from a leadership perspective? Thinking of that, this is a crew of people.
Yeah. So particularly with a platform like a submarine, which is so highly technical and so incredibly complex, and operating in a very very complex, mysteriously complex environment, it's easy to get sort of overtaken by the platform. But when you realize that, it's only the people who bring that platform to life. A submarine alongside uncrewed is nothing. It's a liability. It's a huge liability. It's only when you crew that with, trained and cohesive people that, you can take it to sea and do something meaningful with it. So
one of the things I was going to say, one of the things I would think with a small crew size is, I often say this too, is that on a submarine at sea, every sailor is critical to the mission. And I would imagine with a small crew size, that is essential. Every sailor is essential to the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And highly specialized crews, I think, just mathematically, there's a dozen discrete specializations on board one of our submarines, sonar operators or electronic warfare operators, or the medic, or, the diesel technicians. So all highly specialized in their own rights. But I think the beauty of a submarine crew is that they all pretty much first and foremost know and understand the roles of the submarine and the roles of the other people that they're working with. So they're not trying to do their job in isolation. Their job only matters in connection with how other people on board are doing their job, and in connection with the total mission of the submarine. So that is always a challenge for a commanding officer, is making sure that you are bringing all of that together into a cohesive team, focused on a set mission. Yeah.
So you're like the conductor. You have very talented musicians, and you're basically a conductor conducting this orchestra, right? Making sure everybody's doing their jobs, and
is a great analogy. It perhaps doesn't extend far enough, because you're not just conducting in the moment. You're deciding what production is going on stage as well. You're choosing the tunes and so on as well as just. So I guess what I'm talking to there is, in a naval unit, purpose is absolutely essential. You can't go out there and suffer the discomfort and disadvantage that you do in a submarine if the purpose and the meaning behind what you're doing isn't clear for your people. And for us, the purpose really gets set by the mission. Purpose is an external thing. I think of it in that way. And, the mission for the submarine gets set elsewhere, and we have to go and carry it out. So the role of the captain there, I think, is to understand that wider purpose, be really clear on the mission that has been set for you, but then exercise some vision. Look forward to both the positive and the negative outcomes that might arise as you're out there executing that mission. What's the worst thing that can happen? What's the best thing that can happen? Be open to all of that. But then as you're moving forward, be really clear on reality. What is the actual situation today? On Perisher, we used to say, fight what you see. Don't put the periscope up and wish that the ship was further away. Put the periscope up, fight what you see, and go from there. But reality in a submarine is not always as stark and clear as that example. Sometimes it's really subtle, and it's really difficult because we operate so passively. It can be really difficult to sense what the actual reality is of what's going on around you. But back to that conductor thing, I think the captain needs to instill that purpose within his ship's company or her ship's company. The captain needs to be able to set the vision and, enliven their people towards the outcome they need to achieve. And then really moderate how far you go, how fast you go, in what direction you go, based on the reality of what you're seeing, and help your people deal with the reality of what you're seeing, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent.
It's interesting because it's almost like, I mentioned I started my company 7 years ago, and I always say that you have to have one foot in the canoe of vision where I want to be, and one foot in the canoe of this is the reality of my situation right now.
Oh, right. Okay.
You can't ignore the reality of the situation, because if your cash is going to be short for the month, you've got to sort that out, regardless of what your vision. But you have to, with your employees, you have to balance the idea of vision and reality all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're playing both of those, and it seems like you're saying almost the same thing on a submarine. You have a vision, and you have a purpose, right? That's why you're out there. You have a vision of what you expect to achieve, but you're also say, as you mentioned, focus on reality, fight what you see, and focus on the reality of the situation.
So my very first experience of command was not what I had anticipated or hoped for. I was pretty fresh off the command qualifying course, and I was posted to a submarine just as it was entering a 3-month docking period. Now, that docking was in South Australia. The submarine was home ported in Western Australia, and that's where all the families were. Now, that was okay because it was a 3-month docking. We can cover that. But this was very early in the life of the Collins boats, and various decisions and delays turned that 3-month docking into an 18-month, effectively an extended 18-month deployment from home port. And, to my mind, she was a commissioned submarine. Her purpose was to be at sea conducting operations. My vision was that these sailors would be at sea, no trials officers, no sea training unit, just operating independently and doing the job and providing the service that they were trained to do. The reality was we were stuck thousands of miles from home, not at sea, contending with a dockyard. And, we had, that had massive impacts on morale and cohesion and so on. So it was not the challenge I expected, but it was my challenge as commanding officer. It didn't diminish my responsibility for my people or my submarine just because I was in a situation that I didn't enjoy or didn't anticipate.
Yeah. So that's your
reality. We got out of there. We got away, and in fact, the following year, we headed off to the US. In fact, we sailed under Australia, right across the Pacific.
Oh, nice.
And we actually conducted what was then the longest and is still the farthest deployment of any Australian submarine.
Wow.
So there was a lot of reward at the back end, but a lot of pain at the front end.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about, just a quick question on that, just to follow up. When you go through tough times with people like that, so you're stuck in an extended shipyard period like that, and you're the commanding officer, do you find that you build a bond as a team as you go through those difficult times together? And did it bring you closer, or was it because you're all sort of away from families, you're in a terrible situation, nobody's really happy, you want to be out to sea? So did you bond as a team during that difficult period?
Yes. It's not the sort of challenge that you'd ask for.
Yeah.
But it definitely, I think at the end of the day, they had a lot of pride in the fact that they stuck it out. Yeah. They did what they could. They did what they needed to. They weren't always in control of their situation, but their determination, if that was what the submarine arm demanded of them on that day, that's what they would do. And certainly I have seen that, crisis and really difficult experience or challenge, whether there's a successful outcome or not, can absolutely bind people. Like, it can bust a crew apart and it can bust people individually. But it can also serve as a catalyst to bring people together. So, two quick examples. One would be in between that docking and that really long deployment, we had a workup to do. And on the final night of our operational and safety workup, I ran the submarine into the continental shelf at depth and at speed. Not my finest hour. And, you know, that very difficult night, you know, we got the boat to the surface, obviously. We got the boat alongside. We did what we needed to do to prove that the submarine fundamentally was okay. Had a lot of paint taken off the bottom, but fundamentally it was okay, and really demonstrated to me just how incredibly robust those submarines are. But it was in going through the board of inquiry after that, that the ship's company really kind of came together. You know, people were being examined on, you know, what had happened and how it had happened. And I went into that. I realized ahead of the board that I needed to have a conversation with my officers in particular. We were already a very tight crew, and I knew that my officers, they were very loyal, and I knew that there would be a inclination for them to want to protect me, and there was certainly a sort of natural inclination on my part to want to protect them. But I said to them, look, the way to be loyal here is to honour the truth. We simply need to lay it out on the table so that the board of inquiry can make sense of it, and so that we can learn from it, and so that we can move on. And if, you know, learning from it means that I'm not your captain tomorrow, that's okay. But that's what we need to do: honour the truth and move forward. And it was a really challenging period, you know, right when we were moving up and out, and that really just stopped us in our tracks. But we regrouped and set off and had a great deployment. And there was a similar occasion, again, working up a different submarine ahead of a major deployment, when we suffered a flood at deep diving depth. And that was a terrifying experience. But similarly, you know, to cut a long story short, once we worked through that, both the immediate incident and the sort of aftermath, the ship's company came away with a renewed sense of belief in their boat and themselves and their training and all the people that support them from ashore. And it was a real binding catalytic moment.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, you know, like as leaders, we don't want to suffer those tough times. We don't want to suffer those problems, but oftentimes it does something to bring the team together. I've noticed as well.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask you, because I saw that in your in your write-up, one of the things you were writing about, and I thought it was interesting. You said, as a submarine commander, your responsibility is to learn, train, teach, mentor, and educate. And that would seem surprising to people that think of the military as a command and control environment. But those are truly leadership, you know, skills. I mean, learn, so develop, you know, continue to learn to be good at your job, train your people, teach them, mentor them, educate. So, you know, the role of a submarine captain is really unique, because the other thing that people probably don't realize is that you're getting a new crew every so often. You're not, you know, not taking the same crew to sea every time.
No. Yeah. There's
so
always,
you're constantly having to replace them to people. So this idea of teaching, mentoring, educating, training is a big part of submarine life. It's constantly making sure your crew is capable. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's an essential part of submarine life, regardless of your station on board. It's critical for a commanding officer, but you know, even, you know, as a watch leader, for example, you know, you have a responsibility to learn your craft such that you can exercise command on behalf of the captain. You have a responsibility to train your watch so that they know their drills and they will respond, you know, to the close quarters contact or to the fire in the right way. Certainly, What else did we have there? Learn, train, teach. So I do take a distinction between training and teaching. So that flood, we would not have got through that flood if we hadn't honoured our responsibility to train ourselves, in the weeks and months beforehand. The teaching bit is a little bit different. It's what is it that I know that I've experienced of submarines that I can share.
Yeah.
It's not so much, this is the drill, practice the drill. It's here's my experience, here's my knowledge. How can I best share that with people? The educate bit, it's, we mentioned the book earlier. For me, that's the educate. It's helping people beyond the submarine arm understand what the submarine arm does.
Right.
And that might be, your brother or sister on a destroyer alongside. It might be your mum. It might be the politician when you get to a strategic headquarters. So, yeah, I think certainly for a commanding officer, all of those roles are essential, but they play out at every level on board a submarine.
I know in my experience, working with my commanding officer, there was training all the time. We drilled all the time for every casualty, fire, flooding, you name it. We were always training. But he was a teacher, and that's what I loved about my first commanding officer. Was always taking time, and I was an ensign. I was an 01, lowest officer on board. He was an 06. He was a full captain.
Oh, yeah.
And he would take the time to explain things to me. And like, for example, I was the geoplot operator during battle stations. So I was the guy that would sort of had the whole, I'd keep a track of the whole battlefield, basically.
Yep.
And I love that job. And I remember one time he just put his hand on the geoplot, and he said, and I said, "Sir," and he said, "If you think he's anywhere underneath my hand, I can hit him with a Mark 48 torpedo." And so it was just like a teaching, like and so it was almost a way like, if I can get my hand around it, then we know where he is. Don't worry, don't get it.
Yeah, that'll do.
All you need is that. But it was just like these little things he would teach me all the time, and like he would tell me to, shift the rudder. I'd be on the surface and he'd shift the rudder, and he'd say, see the way the boat reacts. And I was like, oh yeah. He said, do it again. And so he would show me things. And so that wasn't training. That was teaching. That was developing me to be a better officer of the deck. And I think that's I see the distinction between training and teaching.
Yeah. No, I agree. And both absolutely necessary. You got to put the time into the training, but also so much of that world, your ability to perform is based on experience, what you've seen before, what you've sensed before, what you know is possible, what you know is impossible. And none of us have the time to experience it all. So when you can learn from others' experience, if you've got experience, you've got to offer it. And if you can learn from others' experience, you've got to soak it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and really the book is so in depth that we didn't even get close to talking about all the things that are in the book. But what final message would you like to leave with our listeners today, from your experiences, from a leadership perspective? Anything else you want to share from the book?
Yeah, I had to think about this. I reckon it's lead today. So very often I'm asked, how do I prepare for this leadership position, or how do I develop myself to be a leader? And I hesitate to give advice classically, but my simple advice is lead today. Find something that you care about. Take the time to understand what needs to be done, and then lean into that space and lead. Be willing to mess it up. Be willing to make a few mistakes along the way, but find that thing that you care about. You need some vision there. Yep. So understand what it is that needs to be done and help people achieve that which needs to be done. So don't wait to lead. Don't wait for the opportunity to lead. Just lead today.
Fantastic. Wise words. So how can people find out more about you and this new book?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I've got a website, really simple. It's peterscott.au. So you can find some information there about myself, about my coaching business, and the book. And the book is available not yet in the US, so it's available 4th of August, hard copy in the US. But it is available on ebook or audio, so it can be purchased online. Fremantle Press are my publishers, so that's a really easy way to find it. Is just Google Fremantle Press and hunt for Running Deep Peter Scott, and you'll find it and be able to get a hold of that book, and hopefully gain some insight into the life of an Australian submariner.
I love it. Well, we're going to put links in the show notes for all those resources. And the book is Running Deep on Australian Submarine Life. And you've had a long career. This is a fascinating book. I highly encourage you, if you have any interest in submariners and what we do and our life that we lived, this is going to be a fantastic book. Listeners, if you read my books, you need to get this book. This is going to be a lot more sea stories than my books, because you've had a lot more time under the sea for sure. But I encourage people to look this book up. We'll put links in the show notes. Peter, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences, sharing your journey, and the leadership lessons you learned along the way. I appreciate it.
Well, John, thanks for hosting the show, and thanks for hosting me today.
Thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.